Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for having me. I will talk about my study about the Iguanodons of Bernissart as cultural moderators for popularizing paleontology in late 19th and early 20th century Belgium. As I said, my presentation is based on my dissertation for my history degree, and I will give you some of my an overview of my research and its results. I did my study about the discovery and its impact on the Belgian culture, on the Belgian public, on the Belgian people, and I did this through researching Dutch and French Belgian newspapers from 1878 to 1920. Now we all know they were discovered in a mine, in a mine shaft in Bernissart in Santa Barbara, and they were eggs. They were dug up, and then they were exported to the National History Museum. Of course, the segmentation I used for my research is purely theoretical, and they all kind of intermingle and lap over. Now, when I looked at the description of this workshop, it was a bit confusing for me because I didn't know how I was going to fit all of my research into a 20-minute talk. Because my answer to the question, how do iguanodons relate to wider discussions in the public, is that they relate to all the debates in all different angles. So it's very confusing to put them all together and put them in boxes. And this is why my results were quite astonishing and quite confusing. Because if we look at Belgian history, there really is no place for its discovery. We all know they were discovered and now they're in the museum, but that's it. There's no more information about their impact on Belgian culture or how people viewed them at that time and how they were treated by the government or scientists in general. But if we follow the narrative that provided by the articles, that was one of my choice was to not follow the historiography of Belgium during that time, but I just read the articles, see what the context was about, and then started to follow and create a narrative of their own. And what I found was that you can actually recreate Belgian history by only using articles that contain the word iguanodon. And this is not a lot of sources, because I said this is my dissertation, I have limited time, I have limited resources. So it's about 250 articles, ranging from articles the size of an entire page, this small, and a lot of the articles were reprinted by different newspapers. So it's quite astonishing that in Belgian history we don't know about this. I've studied for history for 4 years and I did not know about the iguanodons. But as I said, they were firmly embedded in the culture, firmly embedded in political language, in politics themselves, in science, of course, but also in poems, in literature, humor. They were actually involved in everything. As I said, there were still a footnote at the moment. Now I'm going to talk about the wider debates and how they relate to wider debates in Belgian society. And one of the first debates we can tie the iguanodons to is secularization of society. One particular article is published by Het Laatste Nieuws, or the latest news, in 1904, and it talks about, it actually mocks a slogan of a clerical newspaper, and its slogan is, "There exists no friction between science and religion." Of course, this author tried to envision the existence of these peculiar scientists that who follow this worldview. According to him, these scientists would have had some very special and compartmentalized brains, that one side had religion and the other side had science, because if they were intermingled, his head would explode. He hesitates to imagine what would happen if it wasn't. So this article clearly shows the conflict between science and religion of the late 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And that was, of course, caused by the new earthly narratives that we've talked about so much here, that come to life during the 19th century. And he concludes the article by saying, and this was also the title of my dissertation, why not immediately claim there was a couple of iguanodons lodged in a cigar box on Noah's muscle barge? Of course, we know that it was through these peculiar scientists, just such as William Buckland, that the dinosaur study and research actually came to life. So it's a very weird contradiction that they didn't actually contribute to them. Then the next wider debate I'm going to talk about is evolution. And this is backed up, it all links up to another and backs up one another. So this is another article, and it was called Why Chickens Sing After Laying Eggs. And it was published almost 2 decades earlier, where iguanodons were used in arguments that at first glance combine both scientific and religious arguments. But if you look closer at the article, you can see that the author is in a way ridiculing the idea that nature or God would have created chickens out of monstrous iguanodons, again linking to monstrosity and dinosaurs. And one of the most appealing quotes was "Il me semble qu'il a été plus facile au créateur, pardon, à nature, de faire des poules d'une espèce que de les faire descendre des monstrueux iguanodons." It just means that it would have been easier just to make a chicken, another species, than to let them evolve out of dinosaurs and iguanodons. And it's quite astonishing because, and it shows a broader conflict between the two evolutionary theories. This was written by Félix Dubreuil, and he actually was a follower of Lamarck. So he was transformist, and he criticized Louis Dollo, which we all know of iguanodons. He was the iguanodon student. He did all this research about them. And Dollo was, of course, a follower of Darwin's evolution theory, which means that we can see a clear that iguanodons had made their way into mainstream paleontological and evolutionary debates of that time. But they were at foremost a Belgian dinosaur, and this is where it gets interesting because I'm an historian. It's a Belgian dinosaur, and most of my research is about the impact of them on the Belgian people. And as I said, they can be found in debates concerning foreign policy, politics, science, language, culture. And the astonishing fact is that it didn't take them much time. It was only after 4 to 10 years that they were firmly embedded in culture. And that the Belgian people were so adoptive of them. They were like, yeah, that's our dinosaur. We should be able to have information about them. We should be able to make decisions with the government about the treatment of the iguanodons. And one of the more peculiar articles is this one. It's called The Victim of the Heath. And what would happen, they put the first iguanodon up, this one, it's Iguanodon Q, and it was put in a kind of a big glass cage. Now, I don't know if you call them taxidermists, but the scientists that put them up, they didn't factor in the fact that when you put something that you glue together that was made out of a sort of paste between glue and gelatin, that you put them in a kind of glass box close to the roof of the building, that it would start to disintegrate and fall into pieces, like you drop a clump of sugar into coffee. So visitors actually witnessed their iguanodon just falling to pieces. Meanwhile, the iguanodons had their own doctor. This means every day they checked on the temperature, they checked on the fossils, and still it kind of just laid on the floor. And people were commenting and asking the government, how is this possible? We've paid so much, you use so much of our tax money to put them up, and then it's just, they're just gone. This is also the source of why they all stand like this still, because as Ilya said yesterday, they put wooden spikes in them, so they can't really reconstruct their position. Another thing what I wanted to talk about is that they kind of bombarded themselves onto the Belgian culture. As I said, they were in the language, they were associated with being heavy, being slow, being extinct. A lot of politicians used the word iguanodon, and it's kind of, if you look at it and try to look at what we've been using today, the word mastodon or giant was actually replaced by iguanodon after 5 to 10 years, and everyone kind of used it, especially politicians, and mostly the liberals were the victims of being iguanodons of the politics. Now, at the time, we've been talking about the hard time of the late 19th century. Belgium was also, it was kind of thriving because of the industrialization, but at the same time there was a lot of social misery for the Belgian people. And we can see that through the use of the iguanodons, because every single article that you can find, it has to do with patriotism. And it has to do with the pride that Belgian people had of their dinosaurs. And I think this is one of the key reasons why we are able to navigate the articles, navigate Belgian history, using only iguanodon articles of a very short period of time and a very limited amount of sources. Is that they were mentioned and involved in all sorts of matters, as explained earlier, and they became ingrained in the culture, such as I found numerous articles that just contained the word iguanodon. You have an article about Brussels, and they were like, oh yeah, that's where our iguanodons are staying, by the way. Nothing more about iguanodons, but it's kind of a justification how important they were, and they were kind of a concept that people just knew. It was like, oh yeah, it's so important. Now, this pride did not only arise because of the appropriation by politicians and journalists. I think one of the key factors was the simple fact that the Belgian people was given information about them. And I didn't mean just like little articles. What kind of struck me is that newspapers just blindly copied academic papers out of academic magazines. Out of academic magazines, and put them in a paper that for everyone who could purchase a paper could read them. And those are the papers that are giant. And I mean, they didn't actually adjust them. It was, you can just be a baker, I don't know, be a baker in the late 19th century, and you could just read an entire academic paper. That's why people knew how they were excavated, how they would have lived, what process had their upbringing, or put them together, how that had taken place. Sorry. Now for this, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, so because of these articles, they were much more involved, and they were also more knowledgeable about their scientific background. And one of the most fitting quotes is, "A popular mind, even when that mind is middle class, has a need to inflate if it is to understand." So people need to know about the iguanodons to understand their significance and their importance for our young country, for the scientific world, actually. Now, the next thing I'm going to talk about is engagement, and as I said, the scientific lectures and articles are being blindly copied, but they also kind of served as a moderator for other discoveries, because people now knew about iguanodons, and then all these new dinosaurs started popping up, like the Mosasaurus, Diplodocus, mammoths, everything. And when people read, oh, like the iguanodon, and that's the only thing that says something about the iguanodon, this has been found in Germany, this has been found in America. So people were very much more interested in paleontology because of the iguanodons of that time. Yeah, that's it. And at the same time, I'm sorry. The people, as I said, they were very much connected to them, and there were sometimes certain riots that people would do if the government or the Natural History Museum of their decisions. Now, the first one was because there were rumors that the Belgian government was going to swap one of its iguanodons with France, was going to have an exchange for a collection of shells in exchange for one of the iguanodons. Well, this came to light because kind of some spies were in the government, and it came to life through an article in a magazine called the Mouvement Géographique, And it kind of actually ties to the other lectures that have been here, because it was kind of a pro-colonial magazine from Leopold I. And so they reported that there were negotiations going on, and people were like, no, we don't want any iguanodons going to any other countries. They're Belgian dinosaurs. We want to keep them here. So there was like national outrage that they dared to think about that. To link it all in with other colonial things, they linked the iguanodons with the hunt for elephants in Congo. They were like, maybe we shouldn't do it because look at the iguanodons, they're extinct. They also linked to the question of extinction, like, oh, we found these, what about humans? Are we going extinct? Can this happen to us? A lot more examples for this, but I'm kind of limited in time. So, and the other one was the closure, the other riot was the closure of the National History Museum that lasted almost 2 years. And people were like, why can't we see our dinosaurs? What are you doing? I mean, journalists and scientists were still able to enter the National History Museum, just the public couldn't, so they were very angry. And what was very, very fascinating is that we actually have records of a very public debate, a public discussion that was going on between a middle-class man and professors and scientists. And he's called le professeur. Now, professor is in Belgian and French also used as being a teacher. So he was actually a middle school teacher. And he was visiting the new open museum with his friend who was a journalist, and the journalist kind of reported his findings. And he was kind of angry because of the duration of the closure, how they did it, why they did it. He was, yeah, so as I said, he questioned everything they were doing, like, why did you set it up like this? Why is there no visitor's guide? Why can only scientists have a closer look at them? Because the literacy rate in Belgium was very high at that time. So everyone should have been able, well, everyone that visited could have been able to read the visitor's guides, and there was none until 25 years later. And the main thing he criticized was the social program that was actually being promoted by its director called Edouard Dupont. And he said, yeah, I want to democratize science for public. And he was like, how are you doing this? You're not doing this. You're not exchanging specimens between other European museums. You're not trying to get other scientists, European scientists, American scientists to our museum. You're just keeping the specimens and the herd here just for your own egocentric ways and egocentric reasons. And for your own well-being, like, oh, look at me, I'm the one who got the dinosaurs and no one else has them. And this is actually backed up by facts, because Edouard Dupont made an agreement with the mine that only he and only the Natural History Museum in Brussels could have those specimens and the following specimens that came out of following explorations of the mine. So especially if you think about, we also have university museums. Of course, they were denied access. They were denied specimens. They couldn't use one for their own students, for their own paleontological research. So he was very harsh on them. After that, a real academic professor replied in the newspaper and said, oh, you have no clue what you're talking about. You don't understand why we're doing this. You're just a little quite provincial. You shouldn't say those things. Then the real professor, he kind of replied directly. He said, this isn't right. Why should you be allowed to tell me what is science and what is not important for me? Why shouldn't I get the opportunity to do science? So it's just very interesting to see this all kind of laid out for everyone to read, and there was a real public discussion going on in broad daylight for everyone to read. And this is one. He asked, is this reasonable? Is this scientific? And je me demanderai alors qui peut bien justifier son intervention. And it's kind of saying, I wonder who justified his intervention. Like, well, who are you to tell me I shouldn't be interested in this? And to me, this is one of the most blatant examples of the division between formal practitioners and laymen of science that was kind of in the wake of popularizing science. So my conclusion is that there needs to be a lot more research. There needs to be a lot more information about the dinosaur discoveries and its impact. And it kind of, the Iguanodon kind of, he served as a moderator for many, many things, for many, many purposes. And it was through the Iguanodon that the Belgian people came into contact with science, with paleontology, with matters of foreign policy, all other things. And being here and listening to all the other talks here, it was like, oh, it also has a link with that and a link with that. And it's very interesting to see how much of it actually links to this one little case study that I did. And so I'm even more confused than I was before why this isn't like more general knowledge. And yes, I want to thank you to listen to my rambling.